according to the cloud. Aloha from Oahu. That sounds much nicer than snowy Denver. All right. I think what we're going to do is we're going to get started. It's 10:03 my time. It's 12:03 your time if you're on the East Coast. So let's get rolling. Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Shayna Belton. I'm with the Vela Education Fund, and I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships. I work on building national partnerships across the US, specifically focused on Vela Local, which are hyper-localized giving strategies from the organization. And I am so elated to have you all here. I'm going to do a shameless quick plug. If you are on here, you likely are on Mighty Networks. But if you are not on Mighty Networks, please, I'm going to put in the chat the link to join Mighty Networks. We have transitioned off of our Facebook group, and all of the Vela community calls and things like this, opportunities like this will be posted in there moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and post that in there in just a minute. But in the meantime, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tyler Thigpen, who's here with us today. He is the co-founder of the Forest School, which is an Acton Academy in South Metro Atlanta. And he's also the co-founder and executive director of the Institute of Self-Directed Learning. He and also an instructor and academic director at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, among many other professional achievements that I will let him dig into. But one important thing to note is he was also a partner at Transcend, which is a national nonprofit in school redesign. So he has a number of years of experience. I'm super excited for him to be here with us today and to talk about innovative assessments for teaching and learning. Because we have an hour, what we're going to do is just turn it right over to him and we'll get started. Tyler will be able to let you guys know we're going to stop throughout for opportunities to ask questions. If you want to unmute yourselves and ask questions, please feel free to do that, or you can write your questions in the chat and I'll help moderate and get those read aloud. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tyler.
Awesome. Thanks, Shayna. Hey, y'all. It's great to be with you. Excited to jump right in. Can you guys see? I'm sharing my screen. Can y'all see that?
Perfect.
Awesome. So as Shayna mentioned, the idea we're exploring today, and again, welcome your feedback. I'm going to share a bunch of different qualitative and quantitative methods for assessing student learning and flourishing. And if you have ideas, provocations, just welcome them in the questions and in the chat. Just in terms of what animates a lot of the work that we do at Forest and at the Institute, when you think about various industries over the last 100 years and just the kind of change that has occurred, I have a brother-in-law who's struggling with cancer at the moment, and just to think about even the treatment now that he's getting compared to what he would have gotten 10 years ago is just vastly different, thanks to technological processes. But over the last 100 years, incredible, evolutions, obviously with communication. I mean, I think it was like 2005, probably very few of us would have imagined that we'd be carrying around, smartphones like we are now. I just saw Bill Gates come out with a interesting provocation for like what's next after smartphones, which I'm not resonating with, but I don't know if you've seen that as well. But even the world of work, our ability to collaborate like this over Zoom, it's evolved dramatically over the last 100 years into more creative, collaborative, even virtual workspaces. But when you look at schools, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and still largely now, I actually asked this question to my teenage daughter, who's almost 17. How many features of school can you find that are consistent across these three time periods? And in typical teenage fashion, she sort of said, not a lot has changed in our schools. And I think there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. But the longer kids are in the traditional industrial age model of schooling in our nation, the more bored they are, the less relevant that they feel that the learning is, and the more inequitable the outcomes are. And so to see the leap in motivation and outcomes that we feel students deserve, we feel that we must engineer a new design of school for the 21st century. So we're not trying to improve on the traditional model, but really we're looking for transformational change. And so these assessments that I'm going to be discussing today are atypical to the traditional industrial age model of schooling. And they come from various industries, I think, and maybe feel uncomfortable for learners at first and uncomfortable for parents and teachers. But I think that's to be expected in an environment where we're really trying to go for transformational change. The mission of the Forest School, we have an in-person and an online environment. Our online environment includes learners from all 4 US time zones, Kenya and Uganda. Is that each person who enters our doors will find a calling that will change the world. And the mission of our institute is we support educators and leaders to design or redesign and then lead classrooms, schools, and systems that graduate independent, self-directed learners. Myself, I have 4 kids. These are my 4 kids. They range in age from 17 to 9. They're all at my school, so it's a labor of love for sure. A girl is my oldest, and then 3 boys. As Shana mentioned, I teach at UPenn as well and worked at Transcend. And as a result, I've had a chance to, help design, help start, collaborate with a number of different public and private, entities, some of which you may recognize here in Georgia and across the United States, and a few that are international. And what you see here is for the Forest Schools, the Forest School and the Forest School Online. This is our what I call a portrait of a graduate. So, I as a parent, I used to kind of think about schools like, does my child fit here, or is this a good fit for a child? The longer I've been in this work, the less I feel like that's a relevant question, and the more I feel like, what kind of practice are learners getting on a daily basis at school? What are they doing? And as a result of all that practice over the years, what kind of skills and knowledge, what kind of competencies are they cultivating and building? And so what I do have confidence in about the Forest Schools is that the longer a learner is with us, the more they're going to get practice at these things. Learning to be, which are social and emotional factors, learning to do, which are key marketplace skills, learning to learn, which is, you see the traditional academics there of math, English, civilization, science, as well as learning science. We explicitly teach learning science. There's so much we've learned about brain research over the last couple of decades. And then learning to live together. And so because we care about these, we are trying to assess these. And so what I want to do is for the course of our call, I just want to basically do 5 things. I want to talk about the assessments for learning to be, the social and emotional assessments, and then I'll stop and open it up and ask for questions in the chat and coming off mute. And welcome your feedback too, if you have ideas for things we should consider or that you're doing. And then I'll pivot to learning to do, and then stop and open it up for questions, and then learn to learn, and then learn to live together. And then we have a few whole school assessments that we do as well. So that's kind of the plan. I just want to walk through it and share these assessments. Does that sound okay to y'all?
Great.
Okay. So let's start with learning to be. Flourishing is a social and emotional factor that we care deeply about. And so I think qualitatively, we assess this through weekly check-ins that we have with our learners. And we have a series of just kind of, social and emotional questions that we ask our learners and try and be responsive to that. We also give a weekly survey to our parents and to our learners about their experience of school that week. I know there's a number of other actants here on the call. I know that these folks do that as well. But it's a pretty high bar, we think, and we welcome it, the chance to ask how folks are doing and experiencing the learning environment every week. And then on Mondays, we give this survey out on a Friday, and then on a Monday, our team gets together and we look at these responses quantitatively and qualitatively, and we look at the feedback. And if there's really good constructive feedback, then we will incorporate it in our learning design and communicate that back out to the team. If there's emotional venting, we'll just ignore it because there's nothing we can do. And then if there's something that's not mission aligned, then we'll call out the fact that we aren't going to make any changes because it's not mission aligned, and we'll share that back out with the community and invite further conversation if there are additional questions. We also, for flourishing, often we use the Wellington Index. I don't know if you've seen this, but after a signature learning experience at our school, we'll put this up on a whiteboard and we'll ask the learners to draw a dot kind of where they find themselves on the Wellington Index. Like they just have done a discussion or maybe a challenge, like, how challenged did you feel? Was it challenging or unchallenging? Did you love it? Did you hate it? And then we'll kind of see where those dots are. and then we'll ask them why and have a discussion, and then use that to inform, the design of the next learning experience. We also, a few years ago, we created a flourishing self-assessment where we guided learners to self-evaluate in our middle and high schools on their own flourishing, and we have different aspects of flourishing. We haven't yet done that over the last couple of years for various reasons, but that was something that we found meaningful for a season. And then we also, with our families, twice a year, we ask them for a net promoter score, like how likely are you to recommend this environment? And then why or why not? We get some feedback on that. As it relates to purpose, we use a tool called Purpose Match, which invites learners to consider, what their passion, interests, and purpose are in life. And then we invite them to draft that and then revise it multiple times per year until they graduate from our walls. When it comes to resourcefulness and growth mindset, we use mid and after action reviews. You may have heard about these in the Army or in a high-performing corporate environment, where you sort of assess the success or not of a mission or a project, and we've created our own mid and action, which mid-year review is happens around December, January, and then after action review happens in May or June. And learners are just reflecting back over their learning. How did they do? What did they set out to do? What happened? Why did what happened happen? And what would they do differently next time? And then they share those results with their families. And it's on them to do that. And then lastly, gratitude for learning to be. And through that, each day we have shout outs where for 15 minutes, learners kind of give each other praises of kindness and gratitude. And then we also have something called hero spotlights, where learners can give gratitude to specific learners in the studio. Studio is our word for classroom. Hero is our word for learner, where they'll just give them gratitude for character traits that they're seeing. So let me pause there for social and emotional factors. Those are a few of the assessments that we use. Any questions?
One quick question in the chat was just asking if and this is not in relation to this, but they want to know if the slides will be available to be shared out. So I just wanted to check with you if that was okay. And then I'll go on mute. So Dominique, yes, we'll share them. Feel free to unmute or ask questions in the chat, folks.
Awesome, thank you.
You bet. Any other questions?
I have a quick question just about the term flourishing, because I feel like right now across education, thriving gets used so often, and I really like flourishing in the way that you use that. I wondered how you all came to that, if it was connected to developmental assets or anything like that.
Yep, it is. And if you go to the front page of our website, theforest.school, you'll see the 5 major components of flourishing that we've identified from the research, and our experience has been similar to yours in seeing folks, make sense of that differently. Ours includes connections with beauty, connections with nature, positive connections with self, with others, purpose in life and meaning, and then getting the ability to get into flow. And so those are kind of the main lenses that we use to assess flourishing. And if y'all have other frameworks, happy to consider. Other questions?
Hi, this is Adrena Jackson. I do have a question. The
Bring it,
assessment
Adrena.
that you use. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you bet. And great to have another Georgian on the call. Let's go.
I know. I was like, okay, he's a Georgia. Okay. So, the assessments that you use, are those custom, or are they available for us to use if we want to kind of adapt those?
Great question. So some of them we kind of, pull off the shelf that are already existing, like Purpose Match, for example, is another entity. And I'm an advisor to that organization. Others we create, and then our institute, yes, does offer those for sale and distribution. And that's, we're a nonprofit. We're not trying to drum up money, just trying to get our costs recovered. But some of those are, IP protected, but available, for folks. But they are created, by our team.
Okay, that'll be great, because actually I've been doing more of the verbal, and I'll just do my notes and
Yeah.
conferencing with the parents as to how their students are doing
Yeah.
in the learning environment using the curriculum, and whatever the customized approach we've given them or suggested for that learner. So I do like the fact that, and then I think it would be especially for record keeping, if there was something that was I guess more evidential as far as what they filled out themselves. So I like that. I'm going to look into those assessments.
That's great. Yeah. In our experience, Adriana, and others, I mean, in terms of assessments, sometimes there's ones we can kind of pull off the shelf and use, and they fit just great for our environment. Other times we'll pull them off the shelf and sort of tweak them and make them our own, if you will. And then other times we just have to create them, and I think we've got a mixture of assessments that fit each one of those categories.
Right.
Thanks for that question.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Well, I'd love to, just for the sake of time, move on to learning to do, which again, for us, these are key marketplace skills. So we want every learner at our schools to be great storytellers, want them to be creative, entrepreneurs. You can't graduate from our schools without understanding passive income and how to build a minimum viable product, and how to budget and do financing, design thinking, goal setting, and reflection. So for us, the way we assess this is for storytelling, we have rubrics that are created by folks who are in the various storytelling industries. So whether it's film, TV, dance, theater, branding, marketing, there's many different industries in which storytelling applies. We've created a portrait of a story artist, and we've reached out to experts in those fields and asked them to give us not a teacher rubric, but an industry based rubric. So what, for example, what would be the qualities of a really world-class mood board, for example, for someone who's in branding and marketing? What would be the qualities of a 30-second short film, as evident or as determined by an actual producer? Those are actually available. We created this curriculum that is free and open source for the field. It's at storyarts.co. And we have a number of storytelling challenges, but that's kind of how we measure, storytelling through those challenges and those rubrics. From a creativity standpoint, we have what we call quests, which is basically project-based learning that's real world. And the way we've designed those quests is they're very open-ended. And so we can't, as guides is our word for teachers, we can't really predict, what our learners are going to do. And so, and typically at the end of every quest, we'll have a creativity question that we invite parents, visitors, users, and experts to weigh in on, and invite them to consider how creative or not the solutions to these problems or projects actually are. In addition to that, our learners in middle and high school procure their own apprenticeship. So a middle schooler at our schools will do, one apprenticeship per year. And then a high schooler will do 4 apprenticeships per year. So if you're with us middle and high, you will have done 19 apprenticeships over the course of your career. And the creativity comes in the different variety and diversity of the apprenticeships that they're choosing. And then one of the questions that learners have to ask their employers is the extent to which they were, doing creative work in that field. So it's sort of real world feedback from a creativity standpoint is the goal there. Entrepreneurship, we have a children's business fair once or sometimes twice a year where learners publicly launch, share their own business for their own profit. And, we measure, the amount of dollars that they themselves, garner. And we even have a competition and give away prizes for that. From a design thinking standpoint, we invite experts. So for our quests are designed through a design thinking process. We use Design for Change, which is based out of India. We use their design thinking process, and for each one of our quests, and where learners are having to empathize with a user, a real person or group of people who have a real world problem, and then do some research and brainstorming, and then come up with a solution, many solutions, ideas, and then get feedback on that, and use that feedback to improve it, and eventually share that solution or proposal publicly. And at every step of the way, we're inviting experts to give our learners feedback on their work. And we're inviting users as well to give our learners feedback on that work through, simple forms like you see here. When our elementary learners did a they partnered with a amusement park near our school to design a new roller coaster. And the titles you see there, the Flamethrower, the Annihilator, these were some of the titles of the roller coasters they were pitching. And they got feedback from staff at that amusement park, as well as potential riders of these roller coasters, as well as some top scientists and engineers who know about roller coaster design. And they get this in the form of exit surveys. So we just make exit surveys, which is like after learners have a chance to share their work, these experts and users can go in to this exit survey. It's just a Google form, and give feedback to the learners. And then the next day at school, the learners look at all the feedback, qualitative, quantitative, and they just sort of reflect on it, make sense, and see, how they can improve. From a goal setting and reflection standpoint, every day our learners set goals, and they're setting either SMART goals, which you may be familiar with, or WHOOP goals. WHOOP goals are awesome. If you've never heard about them, it's wish, which is like, what do you qualitatively hope to achieve? Outcome, like what's the measurable thing? Obstacle, what's going to get in your way, and then plan, what's your plan to overcome that obstacle? And then they record their WHOOP and SMART goals in an online platform called Journey Tracker for our in-person school, and then Google Classroom and Schoology for our online school. But that's how we measure learning to do. And then some of the stats that we kind of keep track of that relate to these marketplace skills. We track the number of words that our learners are writing weekly, the number of users and experts they're getting exposure to every week, the percentage of those folks that are people of color. We have an intentionally racially diverse group of learners and families at our school, and we want to make sure there's sort of institutional representation by the folks that are visiting the school. So we track that. We track the dollars earned from the children's business fairs. We track the kinds and numbers of apprenticeships learners are getting, the number of world-class examples or primary source documents that our learners are exposed to every week. And then the number of times they get expert feedback every session. We have 7 sessions a year. So let me pause there. I know it's a lot of content, like a fire hose, but and you're going to have the deck, obviously, but what questions, if any, come up about some of these assessments as it relates to marketplace skills?
One of the questions that's in the chat is actually, how receptive are parents to weekly check-ins, and how consistent is the feedback that you're getting?
Great question. So I'm not exactly sure. So weekly check-in can be one of two things, and I'll address them both. So we have a weekly feedback survey, and parents at this point who've been with us a while, and caregivers, they know that's the primary way. It's anonymous, by the way, but that's the primary way they can share feedback with us and the whole community. Sometimes they'll reach out to me or my team, individually, but they just kind of have this confidence, like if I put it in there, it's going to get responded to. And so the feedback, I would say the consistency lies in the level of confidence parents and caregivers have that that's going to be responded to. But we tell them, like, hey, if you're not going to fill this out every week, we're just assuming it's a 5 out of 5 stars, unless you let us know. And then when they because not many people want to fill out a weekly survey, honestly, but they will let us know, so if it's not a 5-star, and so we'll go in and figure that out. And then the weekly check-ins, that's what our guides, which is our word for teacher, that's what they do with the learners. Those happen every week or every other week, and those are consistent. Lisa, I saw the question, how do you get the experts and users involved with elementary students? And we do that. We have learners ages 4 through 18 at our schools. And, I honestly, we have a strong opinion around the role of a teacher or an administrator in 2022. Typically, it's not on a job description of a traditionally trained educator or school leader to leverage their social network for kids. But we feel at the Institute and the 4 schools, we feel very strongly that because social capital is such a strong predictor of academic achievement, for any learner in our country, that's got to be a key competency for educators and for school leaders and administrators, is the ability to leverage their own professional and personal networks on behalf of our learners, and also to be able to crowdsource among our parent and caregiver community to identify folks who can also be users and experts for these quests. And so we have a private parents Facebook group, for example, where often, I or someone will go on there and say, hey, somebody's looking for an apprenticeship with a dentist. Does anybody know one? And then we'll just all list out the dentists that we know and make a connection, and we'll sort of leverage or lend our social capital to one another in that way. For us, that's not a nice to have skill for educators and school leaders. That's an essential skill to have. Maybe one more question for the marketplace.
Shireen, were you trying to come off mute earlier?
I was. Thank you so much for sharing all of this super dynamic way of checking in and keeping track of what you're doing. But I wanted to know a little bit more about your online then, because we're hybrid. So is this process the same for your online community as it is for face-to-face or in-person communities? And yeah, if you could maybe speak on that.
The answer is yes. All of our signature learning experiences and assessments are utilized in both the in-person and the online, but they've been modified for a virtual environment for the online school. And so what that looks and feels like is kind of a more nuanced answer that I probably have time for, but yeah, for sure, the Portrait of a Graduate, the signature learning experiences, and what we're measuring and valuing and celebrating and trying to develop over time is the same. And then, Dominique, I'm actually going to thank you for your question about the biggest hurdle for keeping track of those stats. I'll get to my challenges at the end, but I'll just tell you right now, it all lives in different places in our Google Drive. So that's one of the biggest challenges, putting it all together. Journey Tracker is proprietary to the Acton network, but I think what's transferable across platforms is goal setting and progress tracking. And I think there's a lot of different platforms that work for that. For example, for our online environment, we use Google Classroom and we use Schoology, and those are meeting our needs at the moment. For the sake of time, want to move on to, you're welcome. Want to move on to Learning to Learn. Again, this is our school's endeavor to, help learners shoulder the responsibility for their own learning and to, learn how to learn, which we as adults, who don't have teachers have to do every day. And so as it relates to learning science, our learners in elementary, middle, and high, they can design their own course. So they can design, we have badges at our school, we don't have grades. They can make their own badges. They can study anything in the world that they want to study. And what we do as guides is we position ourselves as experts of learning design, and we guide them through a process to design a course or a badge, a learning experience. And then we use the basically 16 principles of learning science. When I was a founding partner at Transcend, we distilled the latest on sort of educational brain research and learning science into about 16 principles. And you can find these are free and open source to the field on transcendeducation.org. And we kind of walk through learners each one of these principles to ensure that whatever it is that the learning experience they're designing for themselves, it meets the criteria of learning science, so that this independent study that they're doing, whether it's soccer or Portuguese or stock trading, and these are all courses that exist at our school that learners have created, that they align with the principles of learning science. And then we help learners have to articulate how and why these align with learning science or not. So that's kind of how we're measuring that. As it relates to math, we use the latest and responsive and adaptive e-learning platforms like Khan Academy, KHAN, hopefully you know that, and then Zern for our elementary learners, ZEARN. We also use as a nationally normed test the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, which I even took when I was a kid in public schools. And then we use my favorite standardized test in the world is the CCRA Plus, the College and Career Readiness Assessment. And that measures quantitative reasoning, analytical reasoning, writing effectiveness, and writing mechanics. On that test, there's usually a scatter plot or a bar graph, some really, really important foundational statistics that learners kind of need to know and use. So When it comes to math, we're sort of using these assessments. As it relates to English, again, we're still using responsive and adaptive, often gamified e-learning platforms. I mean, you see a picture of Lexia Core 5 there at the bottom. Some of you guys might use Lexia. We also use Amira, which is the world's first AI, artificial intelligence, teacher of reading. So we use Amira Learning as well. Grade Network is a network of pre-service teachers who provide real world feedback using rubrics, English rubrics that we create or that we use that they have on the writing that our learners do. And then Iowa has an English language arts component to it, as well as CCRA. And then all of our learners, from elementary and older, they publish their writing, especially reviews to books, on Goodreads, and that's a public way of getting some feedback, and people can rate the helpfulness or not of those reviews. And so for English, that's what we do. For science, again, similarly, we're using e-learning platforms because our quests using the design thinking process so often involve the scientific method. We find that expert and user feedback is a great way for our learners to get feedback on the extent to which they're adhering to or not the scientific process in their work. And then the Iowa test of basic skills. And then we also have labs for the 3 major science courses that we give at elementary, middle, and high: physics, chemistry, and biology. And with civilization, we have a unique civilization. We feel it's unique learner-led curriculum that we've developed that's global, and it covers the history of the world. And in order to assess that, the helpfulness of that, our learners do maker challenges for every civilization study that they do. It's about twice a week that they do that. And they will translate their thinking or understanding of what occurred in history into the built environment by doing a maker challenge. And then they'll share that product, prototype with their learners and their guides and get real-time feedback on that. They also, at the end of every year, have to summarize the history of the world in 1 sentence, in 1 paragraph, and in 1 page. And they do that every year, and they just kind of revise that over time, and we'll keep track of how that evolves over time. And then the Iowa test of basic skills gives testing in social studies as well. Some stats that we keep in addition to what I've just described is weekly points. So our elementary, everybody actually, for work that they do every week, learners earn points, which is kind of an extrinsic motivator. Our elementary learners care a lot about points, a lot more than most of the other learners in our building. And those points can translate for them into what are called freedom levels, which is where they get a lot of autonomy and where they sit, what they eat, where they eat, what they do with their time, who they talk to, who they collaborate with. And we find our youngest learners are very motivated, by that. Let me pause there for a minute. Any questions about learning to learn?
We have a ton in the chat. One of the things that keeps coming up as getting direct messaged was, what are you comparing your numbers to when you are doing these assessments? Like understanding that there are, standardized test has a comparative, but when it comes to learn to do or learn to learn, et cetera, like how are you comparing? What are you comparing your numbers to, I guess, that scale?
Great question. I mean, and when we think about, assessment data, obviously there's assessment data in absolute terms, just how do they do on the thing, comparative terms, how do they compare with their peers in the building and outside the building, and then in longitudinal terms, how are they growing over time? We probably care the most about the longitudinal growth, to be honest with you, and that's the thing that we celebrate the most culturally, I think, at our school. When it comes to a comparative thing, and parents and caregivers are often interested in the comparative, the Iowa and the CCRA really helps with that. I mean, CCRA, there's a number of schools in the United States that are taking that, and we get that comparative data at an institutional level about how our learners are performing on that over time. And then for the Iowa test of basic skills, I mean, it's, you can see how a learner's absolute performance on any given subject compares to their peers nationally. So we would do that. We also have created a high school where there's multiple different ways to demonstrate rigor to a college if they're college bound, and not all of our high schoolers are, but some of them are. It is what it is, but colleges and universities, when they look at high schoolers, Typically, they're comparing high schoolers not across high schools, but within that same high school. And so to mitigate that, kind of awkward, reality, we've diversified the ways in which high schoolers can prove rigor. So they can prove rigor through, doing a couple dual enrollment courses, or creating mini design your own course, badges, or through taking, the maximum amount of APs that are allowed, or by getting advanced mastery credits. So that's another way that learners themselves can be compared against one another. How many did I have here versus how many do you have there? What training are there for your guides? Our Institute for Self-Directed Learning has formed over the years a strong point of view on the key competencies of what it is to be a guide. And then we have an onboarding quest, which is qualitatively similar to the experience our learners have at school. It's self-directed, it's self-paced, it's mastery-based. And so our onboarding staff go through this onboarding quest, and they get regular check-ins with me or some of my leadership team, in order to just kind of share their challenges, share their learning, share their wins, share the opportunities. And then they get on the staff training, professional learning on a regular basis as well. But the Institute for us is the thing that actually builds the capacity of our apprentice, junior, and senior guides at our school. Maybe one more question before moving on to the last category. What do you think, Shayna?
That sounds good. If anyone wants to unmute, that'd be great.
This is Victoria.
Hi, Victoria.
Okay. Hi, Tyler. I am very appreciative of your presentation this morning. One, I'm wondering if you're Montessori-esque school, and two, I'd like to know what kind of trainings what kind of qualification do you ask for prospective guys when they're coming in? Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. We have 4 sort of grade bands that span our school. The youngest studio, which is our word for classroom, is ages 4 through 6, so pre-K, kindergarten, and first, and that in fact is Montessori. And so because we find that's a great environment for learners to build their muscles in self-directedness, and to be able to concretize the abstract. And then from grades 2 and onward, it's no longer Montessori, but it is self-directed. There are what's similar about the Montessori method and what we do in grades 2 and above would be self-paced, a lot of choice, a lot of autonomy, and self-directedness, and a lot of hands-on learning. But we're not using Montessori works anymore after grade 2. And in terms of qualifications, I would say, we don't really have qualifications. Instead, we kind of look in 3 places. We'll look in traditional environments for educators who are maybe traditionally trained, but are really fed up with the traditional system and have a proven track record of innovation. We will also look at alternatively trained teachers like Montessori, Reggio Emilia, Waldorf, who are similarly fed up with those environments and feel like they're irrelevant for 2022, and have a proven track record of innovation. And then lastly, we'll just look for entrepreneurs, whether it's for-profit or social entrepreneurs who are great with young people, and have some quantitative reasoning chops to be able to monitor progress over time and build strong relationships with learners. Those are the 3 categories of places where we look for. And I would say all of our staff at all of our schools right now come from one of those 3 kind of categories. Thank you for that question. So the last category is learning to live together. I'll turn to that now. And again, learning to live together, is sort of so crucial, right, for 2022. I mean, how might we bring together families from across lines of difference and help them love and support one another? That's a driving question that we have at our school. And so when it comes to collaboration, trust, and empathy, our learners 7 times a year at every age do 360 feedback surveys. Like, you've probably done that at work, right? Where you, ask for feedback from your colleagues. We do it as a staff as well to to get better as professionals, but also to embody, the kinds of, learning that we want our learners to do. But learners do this, 7 times a year, and they get that feedback and they reflect on it. And what we look for is growth over time in their ability to, be trustworthy and empathetic and collaborate. and demonstrate evidence of that, before they graduate a studio, and especially before they graduate the high school. In addition, we have something called Bucks, which and some other schools here may have a similar, signature learning experience, but it's a form of currency in the studio, but it's really a way of giving and receiving feedback. I earn bucks through the work that I do, and I can spend those bucks in the school store, but they can also be taken away from me if I'm not really a great, collaborator. If I'm not being empathetic, if I'm not being trustworthy, they can be taken from me. So it's a real concrete way of giving and receiving feedback. It can be controversial, and it can be provocative, and it can be hard for learners to deal with this. But we actually really like that struggle. We want learners to struggle with self-governance, to learn how to make rules worth following, and to wrestle with these issues of giving and receiving feedback. I know I went to a school, when I was in school, I could get an A in math, but be a jerk. We don't want to reproduce that kind of learning environment in 2022. And so Bucks is one way that, I could be good at math and still be held accountable for being a good teammate, and a good colleague at school. As it relates to cross-cultural competence, we do belonging surveys. And again, these are age appropriate for every age band. We really, and we're a culturally diverse learning environment at our school. And so these surveys invite learners to self-reflect and also get feedback from their peers on the extent to which they feel safe themselves, and they make others feel safe, heard, and understood. And then I'll tell you, the results we get from these belonging surveys are incredible as guides, because we're never perfect, ever. And we always learn about ways to be more inclusive, with the learners, and maybe uncover some biases that we weren't aware of. So that's really helpful for us. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, is we have social capital trackers. When I say social capital, if you're familiar with that in the research, it's sort of the practical help that emerges from trusting, caring relationships. And so we're specifically tracking 3 different kinds of social capital: bonding, bridging, and linking. Bonding is like relationships that learners have with people who are like them. Bridging is strong relationships with people that they have with people who are different than them. And then linking is relationships that they have with people who are in power, people who can get them a job, who can make a reference or recommendation for them, who can give them an apprenticeship, who can make a connection for them. And the research that I'm familiar with sort of suggests if a learner has really strong social capital, that's going to be one of the strongest predictors of academic achievement that they have. And so we track that. And each learner has a my social network. And then they revisit that a couple times every year to sort of see how these relationships are evolving. And they build these relationships in something called Dream Teams. Dream Teams is an experience where learners themselves recruit champions and mentors and friends who surround them, and they meet 3 or 4 times a year. The learners themselves lead and facilitate that meeting from the youngest stages, and they share their goals and dreams, and then they get feedback and support and encouragement and accountability from this group of champions. And we kind of, as a school, keep track of who's in those dream teams and how frequently they meet, and then how that translates into their social capital tracker. Some other stats that we look at, we are tracking for our learners. We're trying to maximize diversity across 6 dimensions: economic diversity, racial diversity, gender, age, religion, and school background. As I mentioned, we believe learning is better in a diverse environment, so we're diverse by design. And then we track the percentage of staff on board that are people of color as well as gender diverse. Any questions about learning to live together? And then I'll conclude with whole school.
There's a ton in the chat. I'm trying
How
to.
large is your student body? So we have 133 in person and 39 online. That's how large our student body is. We have 45% families of color at our in-person environment, and about 60% of families of color at our online environment. About 33% of our learners across the board are on scholarship. About 30% have a psych eval or an IEP, and about 20% would qualify for sort of free and reduced lunch. So that's our student body makeup. Other questions?
There's one that's kind of across the board on these topics, which is, and then I think there's a lot of questions about whole school in here, Tyler, but it says, with being as experienced as you are, what can you advise to us as smaller entities on what to focus on without feeling overwhelmed? Because obviously you just mentioned a lot of different assessments.
Yep.
So they specifically are working with elementary students, but I'm sure everyone would benefit from, at all grade levels. Like there's so many options here. Like,
Absolutely.
how do you pick and choose,
Yeah, that's a great point. And we're in year 4 for the 4 schools. Well, the 4 school in person is year 4. The 4 school online is year 1. That was birthed out of COVID. But what you're hearing from me now is after an evolution of 4 years. I think my encouragement would be when you consider your portrait of a graduate, right? Like, what are the skills and knowledge that you want? And you're confident that your learners are going to develop in your learning environment over time. For each one of those categories, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5 categories, I have learning to be, do, learn, live together. Yours might be social and emotional skills, marketplace skills, global skills, whatever the categories are. Maybe what's one promising indicator, qualitative, and one promising quantitative, in each one of those categories. And just like starting that, questioning and wondering and exploration and seeing what other folks are doing, I think will probably lead you to form a strong opinion about what you do want to track on a weekly, semestral, annually basis. And then without a doubt, after you go through the year, I think you discover, at least this is our experience, it was helpful for us to track that and we want to keep tracking it. Or it was helpful for us to track that, but we kind of want to change it a little bit, or that's not helpful at all for us to track, we're going to drop it. And then you start adding and subtracting and tweaking. But I think if you start with maybe one in each one of your main categories from your profile of a graduate, that would be helpful. Another question about learning to live together? And then I'll kind of zoom out to whole school.
Feel free to unmute, folks.
I'm going to be brave and unmute. Hi, Tyler. I'm Lisa Brent, and I'm just blown away by everything. And I would love to sign up just as a teacher, entrepreneur, what have you, to learn from you. But I don't know if that's an option. Is there any way that any of us smaller entities that have similar philosophies and missions to what you're doing can continue to learn from what your school is doing or connect with your school in any way? I think all of us are on the same path and mission, is, to help in an alternative school setting with whatever we can do that's best for kids, families, and communities. And you seem to have gone through quite a bit with Transcend and now with your own schooling. And I mean, my mouth has dropped to the floor. So if there's any way, I'm speaking for myself and anybody else. I saw a colleague on there ask, and I just said, I second that emotion. How do we, if anything, connect with you, worked with you, join forces? I know you're in Georgia. The person that I commented and agreed with is also in my local area in South Florida. I'm just wondering, because it seems that you have such an amazing amount of information and tools that you've already used, have kind of checked out and confirmed. And, it's like, why reinvent the wheel when someone's doing a great job using the wheel? And maybe what can we bring to you? And not just as a, what can you give us, but maybe as a learn together, basically, with you. I hope that's not too complicated a question, but I think I'm just overly excited. I'll unmute.
Yeah, right on, Lisa. Thank you for the kind words. I have been doing this work long enough to, and just lived long enough to know, I'm sure I would learn a lot from you as well. Our institute is really the entity that kind of partners with mainly public, but also some private, schools. We have a limited amount of deep dive partnerships, which is like a consulting project that we do each year, and some light touch advisory partnerships. We have some workshops and conferences. And then we're building, to your point, sort of an online, academy that houses a lot of these. We've created some courses at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education, and we're putting those, at our institute, so that other folks can gain access to them, and that'll be live within the year. And these opportunities can be reached at selfdirect.school is our website for our institute. So thanks for the consideration. Casey, as it relates to funding real quick, our scholarships. So we're an independent school. So we charge tuition, but we charge a little bit more than it costs to educate our learners. You know, our tuition is about 10 grand a year per learner, which is very fairly inexpensive comparatively in our region. But it doesn't cost near that to educate a learner in a learner-led environment, because in a learner-led environment, you shed as many administrative tasks as possible, and wherever possible, you give learners, the leadership. And so we have a very lean business model, and it's, somewhere around $6,000, per year to educate a learner. So the overage paid for by our full paying families is what goes to our families who cannot pay. And then our state, Georgia, has an innovative tax credit program where residents can redirect a portion of their taxes to go to lower income families for independent schools. And I raise somewhere between $60,000 to $75,000 for that every year to help make up the difference for scholarships as well. And we do support high needs students. Our process for doing that is, and I used to be, I am special ed certified in Georgia, but I think it's like expired. But what we do is we look at the IEP and the psych eval, and we kind of, especially the accommodations that are being recommended by the professionals, as well as any, qualitative doctor's notes that we have. And then we translate that into our own version of a sort of plan. We call it a support plan. And it has 3 categories on it. It says things that guides will do. And again, guides is our word for teachers. Things that guides won't do. And then things that we recommend parents or caregivers do at home. And that way, it really gets very explicit about the accommodations that in a learner-led environment with limited capacity, we are able to provide. Things that we won't do that they may be expecting. So we could just be on the same page with them and be very clear and upfront. And then things that we would expect that the parents do and caregivers do at home in order for that to be supportive. And then we just let the families kind of look at that and say, okay, can we do that? Can we sign up for that? Do we want to sign up for that? And that's kind of the process that we've gone through, for that. Just to close out here, I'll give you real quick, there's 3 things at this whole school level. We use the Mastery transcript, which you can see at mastery.org. So that's a movement of public and private schools across the United States that are really trying to transform the handshake between high schools and colleges. We love it. Our senior Hadley submitted the nation's first Mastery transcript 3 years ago. And it's an awesome process. The weekly surveys I mentioned earlier, and then every week we look at something called a Studio Health Dashboard. And as a team, we kind of discuss, how's the energy in our school? How's the intentionality? Is it low or is it high? How's belonging? How's civility? How's excellence? And how's learning? Just to be completely transparent, some of the challenges we have, the transcript I've spoken to the heads of college admissions at, over 40 universities and colleges since we've been graduating seniors. And there's 1 or 2 HBCUs that still won't accept the Mastery transcript. And so we're still working with them to try and, communicate our learners have still been accepted to these, but we had to give them a traditional transcript. So that's something that's been a challenge for us. Iowa, the Iowa test, I have mixed feelings about it. It's something that we do. We provide it as a service for families, but it's not self-paced. I mean, Iowa has a strong perspective on a 3rd grader has to know this thing by this day. And we don't agree with that philosophically. And so when our learners take that test, most of our learners are comparatively very far ahead in Iowa, but not everyone. And so when, a parent sees that their learner might be behind pace from an Iowa standpoint, well, then we have to have a conversation with them. It just takes up a lot of time. So if there was a better nationally normed test that was more self-paced, that'd be cool and fun to see. And then, like I said earlier, we don't have a dashboard for all this. I wish we did. It's all in different parts in places in our Google Drive. And so if somebody came up with a wicked dashboard, I'd be interested in that. Any questions about whole school stuff or just in general? I think maybe I would just kind of end with, and Shane, also invite your guidance here as we conclude, but what do we see or experience today that has value for us going forward, or what are the real challenges or wonderings that we have, after today?
I think that would be great. I'm going to open it up to folks to unmute first, and then there's some lingering questions I think in the chat we can touch on if nobody has any questions.
I have a question about cultural change within the whole school.
Sure.
I'm wondering, Tyler, because I was looking at that the studio health dashboard and thinking to myself, when the climate gets tense or there's conflict or the culture is just not there's not morale, in the air.
Yep.
Do you have any best practices for cultural change, changing the whole school's culture?
I don't know that I would call them best practices. I think I would call them a list of moves that we as guides will make based on the current health of the studio. And Dominique, we literally ask ourselves that question every week. Like, what's the move we need to be making? We have a list of all the possible moves we will make, as well as a list of moves that we're not going to make because it's a learner-led environment. And based on the civility, based on the intentionality of belonging, we will make certain key moves. And they range from like putting up a posting in the studio to holding up a mirror to the studio about how things are going, to creating an incentive. Maybe it's an extrinsic motivator, a reward, or a game, or a competition that we would design to help learners, or maybe we would try and pull at their heartstrings and go for an intrinsic motivator. We just have this conversation on a weekly basis. I think guides are having it on a daily basis to be responsive to just how the studio is feeling. And it's an art, probably more than a science. I do think that what works one week or session maybe doesn't work, so it's a living, that doesn't work the next session or the next week in our experience. So it's an ever evolving process. And I think as guides, it's our commitment to that process that's probably the most important thing.
Thank you.
I don't know, Shana, maybe time for one more question, do you think?
Yeah, I think there was a question just generally about Acton. So there's been a couple of those that have kind of come my way, which was just like, what does it mean to kind of become an Acton school? And are there abilities to kind of collaborate with like the Acton model? Is it like a buy-in only, sort of like you got a full-fledged, or if you still want to have some of these practices, but be your own entity and not be associated with the Acton Academy? I think I've just received a couple of different questions regarding Acton generally in the chat.
It's been a real blessing and learning experience for us to be a part of Acton for the last 4 years. And, the way to engage with that network is to apply through their website in Austin, Texas, Acton Academy, I think it's .org, and be considered. They get applications from a lot of parent entrepreneurs on a yearly basis, and they have a pretty significant vetting process. There's a number of learner-led or micro school or larger school networks that exist that are also learner-led, have some similar shared values. I could list them off, but there are other networks to consider joining as well. And then like I said, our institute is pretty much agnostic to governance model and works with mainly public, but also private schools to create and design and lead learner-led classrooms and school environments. But hopefully that answers the question. And I know we're up on time, so I just want to say it's been a really privilege. Shana, thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and appreciate the questions, and excited to learn alongside y'all in this network that Vela has convened. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler. And thank you everybody who joined. Please note, I will send early next week, I'll send the recording, and I've been feverishly writing down and furiously writing down all of the links and everything like that in case the chat recording feature doesn't work, which has happened. So I will get those links out to you with the recording early next week, and I'll be posting that into Mighty Network. So be on the lookout for that. And again, thank you so much, Tyler. There's tons and tons and tons of people being so excited and just sharing grateful messages in the chat. So I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend, and I'll be sharing the slide deck as well. So bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.